Hi everyone, my name is Alexa, and welcome to the first ever episode of Script Club, where we discuss the 101 greatest screenplays of the 21st century so far, according to the WGA. As some of you may know, I do occasional film essays on YouTube about directors and reviews of classic films, but I thought for 2025 we'd back it up and start to where a film truly begins, with a screenplay. Script Club, like a book club, will get into all the nuances of a script, like character intros, description of iconic settings and locations, what does and doesn't work, etc., and then we'll compare it all to the actual film itself. Because I also graduated from NYU with a concentration in producing, I have a little bonus segment at the end of each podcast where I'll talk about if it's possible to make a movie like Get Out or The Social Network on an indie level budget, aka for $700,000 or less. If you guys want to follow along for the episodes, I'll have the link to the current screenplay I'm referencing in the show notes and description down below. My hope is to eventually have you guys participate in the episodes through Patreon, where you can give your opinions on the script and or script versus the movie, and we can discuss it on the podcast, like a book club, but for scripts. But anyway, now without further ado, let's get into the number one best script of the 21st century, Get Out. Get Out is the directorial debut from Jordan Peele. It's now 7 years since its original release in 2017, and he has since then made Us and Nope. But today we'll deep dive into his first ever Oscar-winning screenplay, Get Out, and see if it really is the best script of the century. So I've never seen Get Out. I came into reading the script completely blind, and it was genuinely enthralling throughout. There are so many things Jordan Peele does extraordinarily well, starting with his character introductions, the way that he sets up his character relationships, and full circle use of almost every Easter egg he plants. But let's first start with the world that he brings us into. First, he starts his script with this Romans quote, which plants a lot of key words to keep in mind. Sacrifice, transformation, renewal of your mind. Very creepy stuff. So the film starts with 3 different characters. There's the Shaw family as one, and their American dream home. 2 kids, I imagine, like a white picket fence, living in their own bubble. Then there's Andre, a black Brooklyn transplant, now late night jogging in what one can assume to be a predominantly, if not all, white neighborhood. And then there's this medievally masked individual in a very specific car. Jordan says here, a vintage cream-colored Porsche Boxster. So we know that the person's rich. Anyway, this cold open, simply put, is that a black person is being kidnapped. And not just in like a scary, creepy way, but also with a little humor between this vapid conversation the Shaws are having about Disneyland and the French tutorial coming out of this masked man's car. It's a horror comedic scene. It's a perfect introduction into the world that we're about to enter. So now on page 5, we actually meet the main characters. And I love the way Jordan Peele describes every one of them. Chris, handsome, naturally athletic, scrutinizes his reflection with a touch of vanity, so we know he's probably a little prideful. And then Rose, cool and beautiful like an old summer camp crush, which means to me like the popular girl in middle school where like every boy's crush was her. So we know Rose is a catch. Also immediately we know that Chris has got a little money if he's making it as a photographer. On top of that, the slug line also says that we're in Brooklyn Park Slope, which is a notoriously expensive part of Brooklyn and also predominantly white. As a New Yorker myself, I find it just a little bit odd that an urban photographer would live in a very brownstone, family concentrated area because he seems better well suited in Williamsburg, but I digress. Also immediately we know Rose is from money since she comes back to the apartment with 2 bags of pastries and says, I couldn't decide. No one broke is paying double the price of one $8 scone in Park Slope if they don't have expendable money, okay? And then lastly, what we know about their relationship, even before we know that he's meeting her parents for the first time, is that they're a new couple. Rose says, so how come whenever I come over, indicating that they don't live together? So again, this relationship must be new. Page 9, Jordan again describes a car in great detail, a shiny white BMX X5. So now we definitely know they got money, and we know specifically now that it's Rose's car because he says in the next scene that her car is a mess, which means Chris doesn't have a car or he doesn't drive. Chris in the car calls Rod. We get another great character intro in the actions and dialogue. One, he's a stocky TSA agent, and second, this is something that I put together, he's a little bit of a conspiracist. How do we know this? Rod says, like, you can't hide a bomb in a wheelchair? Watch, Chris. The next 9/11 is going to be on some geriatric When you have a character coming to that conclusion with a line like that, I think it's safe to say that they're kind of a conspiracist, maybe. And they also probably go a little bit above and beyond. We also can learn from this that he's probably going to be our comedic relief throughout the entire film. Other really good character tidbits that we get. Rose is a little bit provoking when she's sort of like flirting with Rod. Chris is maybe a little bit insecure, a little more compliant. And then the deer hits the car windshield. The officer asks for Chris's ID, even though he wasn't driving. So now we've got the holy three of what this world is. First, a black man gets kidnapped in a white neighborhood. 2, there's a first black boyfriend to a white family conversation. And then 3, a black man is asked for his ID from a white officer when he wasn't even driving. So we know officially we are in an anti-black man's world. All right, so now let's meet the parents. Dean, an incredible intro. I love his words. Balding, barrel-chested, bear hug. I love that he says he's got an endearing cockiness, dad humor, says garbage instead of garbage. And then for Missy, she's intellectually patient, relaxed, and in control. Great juxtaposition between those two parents. They live at this beautiful estate. Jordan Peele also describes it very nicely, almost as if from memory. 3/4 of the way is surrounded by woods, 1/4 of lake. It's expensive and it's isolated. So again, we know they got money. Also, again, a perfect display of the potential relationship between the parents and Chris. With Dean, his first line, he says, Mr. Armitage will do. And then he laughs and he plays it off and he's like, I got him, ha ha ha. Meaning that Dean puts on a front. And then Missy, very, very oddly, the first thing she says is, yes, you'll do just fine. So handsome. Yeah, very, very weird choice of dialogue, which can only make me imagine with the words that she's either prophetic or has some sort of a plan. Before this, we also met Walter. He's the groundskeeper, black, but we'll come back to this. What I want to focus on next in the house, which I only picked up on my second read, was that one of the first paintings Jordan describes in their house is of medieval battles. Do we get that? We had a medievally masked man on page 4, and now 15 pages later, it comes up again. This family definitely has some tie to the intro. Just a few words later, it then says taxidermy. So again, this family likes to hunt. And again, on page 4, the man had a gun with a silencer. And when do you use a silencer? You use it when you're hunting. That's all I'm gonna say. Moving on to page 20, the standout for me in Rose's bedroom was a stuffed lion. It's an oddly specific thing to point out, so I assume we'll come back to this later. And then we get into the chunk of the story. Missy's a hypnotist, Dean is a retired neurosurgeon, Chris has a smoking problem. There's also a lot of pets in his script. We already have a dog and a cat. We meet Georgina, also a black housemaid who on page 24 comes alive and is in a daze. And then lastly of the family, we meet Jeremy. Again, great intro. Jordan Peele says, rich kid intense. Like, that's a fantastic line. His relationship is also easily established. He tries to provoke Chris, wants to try and fight him, which only comes across to me as the reader as, well, A, he's drunk, and B, He might be trying to impress his dad. He also tries to show signs of authority, like when he says, "You've had your chance," to his dad. Which then makes me think that Jeremy, back on page 22, when Dean introduces him in the photo, he said that he's in med school. This all just probably means that he's trying to follow in his dad's footsteps, get his approval maybe, but Jeremy is like this tough, sort of unhinged guy. Okay, so now dinner's over and we are back to the stuffed lion. I love it here on page 34. It says, "A stuffed lion seems to watch Chris. He turns it away." It's a great line. It's a little bit of foreshadowing there, you know, a little bit of a predator watching his prey. I also like immediately after him smacking a buzz in his ear. So that, again, you know, Jordan Peele's really good at this three thing that you're supposed to do. This now marks the third time an animal or living thing has sort of crashed into Chris. First there was the deer and the windshield, then there was a sparrow. A sparrow kept smashing into the patio back door, and now a fly, which he smashes on his face. All of which can be considered as warning signs. We then get into the hypnosis. The scene is extremely interesting to me. It reminded me a lot about The Master, when the Master like questions Freddy when he's like, don't blink and answer me. I liked Jordan's description of the sunken place, a black abyss falling into it as if through water. I also like on page 42, he says, "This place sounds like it's crawling with insects." Again, there's a lot of pets, there's a lot of animals here, kind of sounds like the animal kingdom. Back to the lion, are we following? Because then literally right after, a deer, as he says, with the flesh stripped off and mostly its skull exposed, impales Chris. Then that sunken place death wakes him up as if it was a dream, kind of like Inception. It's all a very trippy scene. It's extremely original. I really love the TV as his eyesight, the writing, and how he paints this room through his writing. It's just really so clever. Later on 43, there's another standout detail. His phone battery is low. Remember it, pocket it, and let's move on. It's party day. My first opinion on this entire scene is that it has to be close to summertime, right? If not the summer. This day felt incredibly long. Every scene I was like, surely the sun must be setting by now, huh? But it just kept saying day to day, and it's slug lines, and I was like, wow, this is a long day. 46, we have another animal, a service dog, and throughout the day we meet all these wonderfully described people. Again, Jordan just does this really, really well. My favorite is Nelson Dietz, who smiles in a wheelchair with jaw hanging. And then Lisa Dietz, loose-lipped trophy wife, smiling in a predatory manner. Like, I was like literally laughing as I read that. It's so good. By the end of 50, we see a whiteified version of Andre, the guy from the cold open, who now goes by Logan. He says, "Why, the Armitages, of course. We're friends of the family." By this point where I, obviously realized Andre got kidnapped and all of a sudden is appearing here, I was like, did the dad mean hunting black people? Because if you remember early on, Dean said like, "Oh, one of those deer is down, 1,000 more to go." And I was like, is he talking about hunting black people because like Andre's here right now and black people are to be hunted? And then on 52, I'm like, yes, Dean definitely did that, because Dean says at the bottom of his little speech, "I'm reminded of stories of how the knights of old would gather in honor of a new crusade." Hello? Knights? New crusade? Chris? Oh man, it was then that I thought it was the dad who was the man from the beginning, because Dean introduced himself as a retired neurosurgeon. He says he twiddles his thumbs, so I was like, okay, so that's what he does in his free time. He likes to kidnap black people. Anyway, everyone's being super weird at the party. Bottom of 55 literally sent a chill through my body as soon as I read it. As soon as Chris is out of sight and earshot, the mingling guests stop in mid-conversation. It's now clear that their conversations have been fake. They're all hanging on Chris's actions. What? What the hell? That's so crazy. I was not particularly thinking of an auction when I first read this, but this is what comes after. It's revealed Dean is hosting this silent auction, and I knew right away that the character Jim with the service dog would get it. We learned early on that he's blind, we learned that he's a gallery curator who lost his eyesight, and as we know, Chris is this urban photographer. But I knew that it would be Jim because in the last part of the conversation that he has with Chris on page 54, he says, "I think we could do wonderful things together." Right? Like that line of dialogue, it like could appear to sound normal, but when I read that, I was like, that's a little sus. Like, you just met this man, you know, like that's a little much. So Jim wins the auction to Chris. It's just, what a crazy thing to say. Now, I am a little ahead of myself though. The auction does come after Chris getting his phone from Rose's room. He excuses himself, goes upstairs. That was the whole conversation stop midway. He calls Rod. Rod, being the conspiracist we know him as, he says, connecting the dots. The mom put trances on black people, and it's clear as day. It's kind of crazy that Chris doesn't put two and two together, because he himself is like extremely weirded out by Walter and Georgina, and then he's been hypnotized himself. But you know, as we established, he's like just a little bit more compliant. He just probably wants to be a little ignorant for Rose's sake. After he hangs up the phone, he then meets Georgina formally, who's like extremely weird. She also, after she cleaned Rose's room, unplugged his phone from charging, so it's still sort of on dead battery. She speaks the word I have right now is media trained, and it's only until Chris says, "get you in trouble," keyword trouble, Jordan then writes Georgina's dialogue very differently. She says, "Oh, no, 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 no." And that, from what I just read, she was speaking like before, seems really like off. So to me, I'm like, okay, trouble here is a keyword. Like maybe they all have specific keywords. I'm thinking maybe Chris has something to do with car crash, mother, something like that. Because then in the next scene, when Chris goes back downstairs with his low battery phone, he sees Andre/Logan talking to the crowd. He also seems to have a keyword / a trigger, actually, with a camera flash. With that camera flash, he totally breaks out of character and screams, get out to Chris. And you know that Leonardo DiCaprio Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? I was doing that when I read that. So then it's the auction, and then the rest of the 30 pages is a complete roller coaster ride. And it's also paced just so incredibly well. Chris sends the picture of Andre Logan to Rod that he took. Rod connects the dots. He's like, bro, that's the brother that's been missing for 6 months. Then boom, Chris's phone dies. All the party guests have left except for Jim. Chris is like, hell nah, Rose, girlfriend, we gotta get out of here. He starts packing his bag. She's like, sure, I'll go find the car keys. And he stumbles upon a little box in her closet filled with photos of ex-black boyfriends. Page 72, it says, under the image are written the words, Xmas 2014. Stunned, Chris flips to the next picture, another romantic selfie with a different black guy. And then later it says, then 8 different black guys. Bro, what? First of all, auction days being on holidays is like really sick, but that kind of makes sense. But what's even crazier is what Chris sees before these pictures. They are pictures of Rose as lead roles in plays. She's not a random maid. She's Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. She's Miss Hannigan in Annie. She's an actress. This is an act. She's a part of the act. Then suddenly Rose comes back into the room, finds him looking, but her great act continues. Chris goes downstairs. The rest of the family is waiting for him. He's like, Rose, where are the keys? And I love what Jordan Peele wrote here. Page 74. Rose lamely rummages through her bag. Now, okay, I had to look this word up, but it means in a weak and unconvincing manner. Bro, like if we didn't know then, we know now. Rose is a part of this whole auction family business thing. and I'm scared. Long story short, Missy hypnotizes him again by hitting a spoon against a teacup, and he's back in the sunken place. In the meantime, Rod's calling Chris. He's a day late now. He was supposed to return yesterday. And as a conspiracist, which we've established, he is getting sus. He went to the police. They laughed in his face, which was so funny to read. Back at the house, they've tied Chris up, and then we learn what the auction was really for. Jim says on page 88, Missy's hypnosis was merely to sedate you. For what? Chris says, for the procedure. Jim then says, Dean's the only guy who really gets the science. He's the one who's discovered that partial brain transplantation solves the little nerve ending problems. Pause. Dean? It honestly went over my head when he said, yeah, I'm a retired neurosurgeon. Guys, but do we all see that nothing is mentioned for no reason? And now we know that Jeremy probably assists him in all of these procedures because he went to medical school too. But it's all just like so written and delivered so well that I couldn't have guessed it. Dean was spewing so many facts about like his dad and, you know, Jeremy and that when he said neurosurgeon, I was like, all right, cool. I took away that the fact that he was retired and he had a lot of free time on his hands. Then Jim says, you'll still be able to see and hear, but your existence will be a passenger. An audience you will live in, Chris interjects, the sunken place. Leg chills, guys, when it all comes together. And at this point, so we think the protagonist, yeah, it's over for him. He's dead. But we, as screenwriters, know that A, we don't kill main characters, and B, it's about time that there is the third act twist. I really recommend just for yourself reading pages 91 and on because it's just pure action genius. But simply put, Chris escapes when Rose unstraps him. He strangles her, and I love again how Jordan wrote it. He says, she stares at Chris's eyes as her consciousness fades. Then, through the agony, her face curls into a twisted smile. She's having fun. Psycho. Rose goes limp in Chris's hands. Jordan Peele, you are a sick man. Okay, first of all, her face curls into a twisted smile. Guys, did you hear that? Then moving on in the actions, Chris sneak attacks Jeremy with a badminton racket. He knocks him out, and then Jordan says Chris whips him over and over, warping the racket to a crumpled, bloody mess. Great picture there. Then Dean gets a little impatient. He's waiting for Chris's body in his makeshift basement operation room that right as he steps outside of it, Chris, as Jordan Peele writes, charges from the darkness with deers ahead in his arms. He punctures Dean through his neck and shoulder with the antlers. Dean stumbles back into the operation room, deer's head attached, and a few sentences later, the operation bed has caught fire. Mind you, with everything that I've just read, it's only been in a page and a half. And then next up in the family, we have Missy. Chris finds her in the kitchen, bottom of 93. Chris knocks the tea cup out of her hand, spraying hot water on her chest and face. She screams. Chris also finds his phone on the dining room table, and the rest of the sequence is just crazy. Jeremy's still alive. Chris eventually takes him down, finds car keys in his pocket, and it unlocks the car from the first scene, which I was like, oh my god, it was Jeremy who took Andre. And that makes sense because Jim literally said on page 87, the son Jeremy's wrangling method sounds way less pleasant. Like, why did I read that and it go over my head? Like, I was too focused on the fact that Dean was retired and I was like, this man is out hunting. Anyway, Chris gets in the car. He drives away. He runs over Georgina, then decides to take Georgina with him, crashes the car. Jeremy again, still alive. He has a gun now. He's like, no, Grandma, no. And holy shit, Georgina is the goddamn grandma. Earlier, again, remember when I was telling you, Dean had just been rambling on in the house toward a Chris. Earlier, he said that Georgina and Walter came to take care of his parents, so the grandparents, but when they died, Dean just figured to keep them around. He also mentions to Chris earlier that his father, so the grandfather, was a almost qualified Olympic runner. Guys, Jeremy literally says after this, "Grandpa, get him." And Walter starts sprinting down the road to Chris. Oh my God. That's Grandpa and Grandpa. It's really so sick and twisted. I just genuinely couldn't believe it. It was too good. Again, it seems like our main character is going to die, but then Chris has his phone and boom, camera flash. It sets Walter off. He comes back to himself. In that point, I realized that the trigger was the camera flash, not associated words. Walter now has the gun in his hand. He shoots Jeremy, then he shoots himself, and now Chris is the only one left. He made it, or so we thought. Jordan writes, 2 police cars pull up. Chris drops the gun. Mind you, he's next to a dead Walter and an almost dead Jeremy. Continuing the script, Chris, covered in blood, raises his sliced hands. Chris says, "Look in the basement." Action. He is violently swarmed by officers. The house burns. Bro! There is no more basement. There's no evidence except a gun, 2 dead people, and you, my brother. The only thing that I could kind of understand is that Walter is black and he's also dead. So, he has a chance to explain himself here, but it doesn't matter because Jordan Peele, the next slug line on page 98, interior maximum security prison visiting room. My brother Chris is in jail. But there's one last Easter egg here. So Rod is visiting Chris in jail, and Chris can't remember anything. Rod is like, "Well, try again, please. Let's start at the beginning. Walk me through it again." Rod knows Chris has been defeated. And you're probably thinking, as I was, how does this man not remember anything? But if you read the script, in the first conversation Rod and Chris have with each other back in the car on page 11, when Chris was like, "Yo, remember you got to take care of my dog," Rod says, "What? You think I forgot? Damn, see, give your boy a little credit. I don't forget shit, you do." And I kid you not, on page 11, I underlined that line right here. Because I was like, that's a little too unprovoked of a line. It goes too far. Like a joke. This joke is like an extra sentence. And I was like, that's gotta come up again. And as we see, everything connects back to each other in the end. This was genuinely such an insane script read. It's extremely inventive, horrific, and still really funny. Rod is hilarious. So as for any script discussions, this is what I hope to include your guys' opinions on and thoughts in future videos. I myself have 4 that I just want to discuss really quickly. As I mentioned, the sparrow crashes into the patio door, and I'm just really curious about the bird's specificity. Jordan on page 25 introduces the dead bird as a sparrow. He also does this with the white cat and the small black dog. He also does it for cars. So this extra little detail could just be a him thing. I'm also very curious if you guys were shocked that Rose was in on the family business. Because it was only on the second read when I put 2 and 2 together about her acting. Because right here on page 46, when Chris tells Rose about the hypnosis, she says, "That happened to me too. The nightmares when I was a kid. She," meaning Missy, "hypnotized me once for stage fright, and I had the craziest nightmares, but it worked." Right? So, because Chris didn't even remember that he was hypnotized until Walter had brought it up to him. So with me, I'm like, okay, Rose probably thinks that Chris is her first black boyfriend, but that's only because Missy, her mom, hypnotizes her to forget that the whole family goes through this really demented, terrible thing, and then just hypnotizes her daughter so she doesn't remember it. Then there's The Lion. Again, I got the Predator versus Prey thing on the second read, but I do remember reading it for the first time, and The Lion just never came up again. For me, when I thought it was first introduced, I thought there was going to be like a camera in the lion's eyes, and that like maybe could have made sense at some point in the script. You know, when Chris is going through the red box and Rose went out to look for the keys, she could have just been in like an extra room. The lion had like a live feed of the room, and she sees that he found the red box, and she has to like go back in there and like act as if she didn't know, or, you know, continue her acting. Like, I just thought the lion, because it was so specific, that it would come back up again. But, you know, the Predator versus Prey also works. And then lastly, the ending. I don't know about that ending in the maximum security prison. Okay, Chris, to me, is a little too passive to accept the fact that he's in jail. And also, as I mentioned, like, okay, the house burned down. We don't know who was inside it, right? But on the lawn is Jeremy and Walter, but Walter's black, you know, so I don't know. I feel like there could have been a way to wiggle out of that one. But then also, like, we have this picture of Andre. We also know that there was an article published about Andre. Why don't you reach out to the publisher, put out something in a wide search? Like, have you seen this man, XXX? Like, there just felt like there could have been a resolution there, that he didn't have to live in jail. And also, you would think that somebody who was trapped in the sunken room wouldn't want to be trapped in jail. I mean, they had his hands tied down, and in jail they have handcuffs on you. Like, I just don't think Chris would want that. Anyway, the last thing I really liked about this script is that for a writer who knows he's going to direct the script, Jordan Peele, it's very plainly written, and that's really good. Very rarely does he use overly descriptive words. There was one that stood out to me when Andre, after the flash at the party, Jordan wrote, "Let out a scream so blood-curdlingly." Blood-curdlingly? It's such a very intentionally descriptive word to throw the reader off. When I first saw it, I was like, whoa, Jordan doesn't write like that. So this is clearly like, you know, this is a big thing to pay attention to. And it was. I mean, this is when Andre's breaking the Logan character and is like, get out of here. Anyway, because he writes so plainly and really only ever describes in color, the color of the cars, Rose's pink room, and the color of the light in the sunken room, I'm really excited to see how the production design and costumes really elevate this world in the actual film. I especially want to know about those medieval paintings, and I just think it would be really cool to see that go from script to screen. And, well, we still have our little segment left to go. Can you make Get Out on an indie level budget? Well, Get Out was made for $4.5 million, and I, as a indie level producer, am going to explain to you how you can make a movie like Get Out for $500,000. Yes, folks, that's $500,000.